So I think it's fair to say that anything anyone asks me to do at MSNBC, I'll do it. Go to D.C. and help host the funeral of the 41st president, stay up till 1 in the morning and come back at 6 in the morning. But introducing you, I have to say I was nervous. So let's dive right into all.
You made me nervous.
But let's dive right in. And there's so much from the book that I want to get to. We're going to do that. But I have to start with what probably terrifies lawyers to see non-lawyers stick our fingers in and meal around in. But I was on the air when the filing came out from the Southern District of New York. It was a sentencing memo around Michael Cohen's crimes and pleas and attempts at cooperating, but I understand it wasn't a cooperation agreement. The newspapers and the smart people that we talked to used this word, unindicted co-conspirator, where if you've watched any movies about Nixon, you know that's what they called him. Is the President of the United States right now an unindicted co-conspirator?
I don't know. Not in the formal sense that he's been named in an indictment where you can actually say that this defendant and named others or others by pseudonym conspired together, and that's how you formally name someone as an unindicted co-conspirator. But if he's not there, he's certainly close, given the language in the indictment, in the filing, that the crimes are committed at his direction.
So he directed crimes to be committed. Is he just not yet in trouble for them?
I don't know the answer to that because I can't see where the investigation is, either the Southern District of New York's investigation or Bob Mueller's investigation, so I don't know.
What do we make of the fact that in the filing and in the guilty plea, when Michael Cohen went before the microphones, he implicated the president. He said he paid hush money to women with whom Donald Trump had relationships, sexual relationships, at the direction of the president. And that was one man's word, I suppose. But on Friday, when it appeared in the sentencing document, it seemed that either does it need to be corroborated? Did they have more data points to put the president, individual one, in that document?
I'm not sure. The big difference to my eyes was there was some looseness as a result of Cohen saying it in court that allowed people to say, well, it's not clear that the government is sponsoring that allegation. Maybe that's Cohen or his lawyer saying that. What they did on Friday was the government formally sponsored that allegation. And so it was clear that what Cohen was saying in court is something the government believes to be true.
So I'm going to do what I do to Chuck Rosenberg. Is he here? He's our favorite at MSNBC. Yes, right?
See, now you're going to create a fan frenzy.
What happens between Michael Cohen saying, I just want to understand the process of this. What happens between someone like Michael Cohen, who's a felon, convicted of, I think, 7 crimes, and then pleaded guilty to another before this document? What would happen? Would they collect more evidence? Would they, because as you just said, the government sponsored the assertion that the president directed those crimes. What else, what kinds of things could have happened to make them believe it more?
Well, I don't know that they believe it more than they did when Cohen said it in court. It might be that the state of the evidence is the same, but now the government has the opportunity to say it in a court filing. Again, it's hard for me to say because I'm not involved in the case. I'm looking from the outside. But it's possible that the state of the evidence has not changed. They had Cohen's cooperation and corroboration at the time Cohen pled, and it's the same now, or it could have gotten stronger. Can't say.
So if Trump wasn't the president and someone went to court in the Southern District of New York, sponsored information that they directed a crime, what would happen to that person?
Well, that person would be in serious jeopardy of being charged because the government wouldn't make that sponsoring allegation if they weren't seriously contemplating going forward with criminal charges. Now, where it stands here, I can't say.
So that was one of the big headlines on Friday. But before that filing dropped, our show was on a live shot of you.
So it improved right after that.
No. You were fielding questions from reporters after being interviewed by the House Judiciary Committee about what?
All kinds of stuff. Nothing that you shouldn't have been allowed to see live, frankly. It made no sense to me that it was a closed, and as you know, I tried to push to get the American people to be able to watch it. And if you read the transcript, you're bored. because it's a
I didn't say that.
rehashing of a lot of old stuff. So, Tale of Two Cities, the Republicans asking me about Hillary Clinton's email investigation, whether I was in the tank for Hillary Clinton, and which would be a surprise to
They laughed. Can we record that? Can we send that to them?
Yeah. And so the notion that I was on Hillary Clinton's side, and then the Steele dossier business, the notion that underlying the questions is that there's something illegitimate about the FBI's counterintelligence investigation of whether any Americans were working with the Russians. And then the Democrats were asking a variety of questions focused on how I felt about things President Trump has said and done.
All right, let me read because the president reacted to your...
So he's finished reading the 253 pages?
Yeah. Well, I didn't say that. He likes 240 characters, so you may have seen something on Twitter. This is what he wrote. Leakin, with interesting, seemingly accurate grammar, James Comey must have set a record for who lied the most to Congress in one day. His Friday testimony was so untruthful. This whole deal is a rigged fraud, capitalized inexplicably, headed up by dishonest people who would do anything so that I could not become president. They are now exposed. Now, I don't want you to just react to that, but just tell me about being Jim Comey, where people snicker when you say they thought I was in the tank for Hillary, and then Donald Trump attacks you after you testify truthfully and under, no one lies to Congress except, well, I guess except Michael Cohen, and we don't know who else. But what is it like to see this and still sort of be the guy that has a bum rap on the Hillary email scandal?
My reaction to it is actually disturbing to me, which is kind of, there he goes again. I thought I was lying, James Comey. Now I'm leaking, James Comey. But I kind of shrug and sometimes smile and laugh about it. And then I have a secondary reaction, which is to be horrified at my own numb reaction, right? We have to remind ourselves the President of the United States of America is publicly announcing that people are committing crimes, they should be in jail, private citizens. That's not okay. And if we become numb to it, we risk surrendering the norm. And I've said this to a lot of Republicans. I've said, let me ask you all a question. If the next president of the United States is a Democrat and wakes up in the morning, God forbid, but wakes up in the morning and starts tweeting that there ought to be criminal investigations of the current Republican leadership of Congress and naming names of people who should be in jail, what's your reaction going to be? And I said, don't answer that. Your head's going to explode. So why is it not exploding now? This is about what our country stands for.
Well, let's not, I mean, part of normalizing all of the conduct is rushing through it. So let's not rush through what you just said. He accused you of a serious crime, lying to Congress, and there are no consequences. Does that mean the Justice Department is fully functional? Or, I mean, what does that mean? That no one can pick up the phone and say that, Mr. President, you just accused the former FBI director of a felony?
Well, the people who can hold him accountable for that is us. That's not the Department of Justice's job. That's our job, not to become numb to it and to stand up and participate in holding him accountable to those norms. I think of the American voting population as a giant bell curve. There's, at the wings are where the wing nuts are, and in the middle is mostly people who are unengaged. That giant is awakening because of things like this, and we have to continue to awaken the giant. So we're going to have an election in now less than 2 years. Mm-hmm. We must hold him accountable. And it's not a Republican thing or it's a Democratic thing. It's an American thing, because this is unacceptable behavior for the leader of our country. It's not anybody else's job but ours.
I want to ask you about the substance of his tweets, because it's been reported now that Special Counsel Mueller is, and I want to ask you about your comments about Mueller, is looking at the president's tweets and laying them over what his investigation has revealed about his private conduct around some of the flashpoints in the obstruction of justice investigation, which includes your firing and the things he said to you about the investigation into Mike Flynn. When he tweets leakin', lying, is he tampering with a witness? You're a witness?
I'm a witness, potentially. Yeah, I don't know how the special counsel thinks about it, but if I were a prosecutor and a public figure started attacking the credibility of one of my witnesses in a pending investigation, that's something that I would look at very closely.
Wow. I mean, so if you were the U.S., I want to play this out. If you were the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District and a high-profile person were tweeting praise for someone like Roger Stone, who refused to cooperate, praise for Corsi, who ripped up his plea agreement with Mueller, praise for Manafort, who we now know lied to Mueller and had his cooperation agreement torn up, what would you do?
I would want to understand whether this amounted to a violation of the witness tampering or obstruction of justice statutes. I'm not prepared to judge it, but again, if I were prosecuting a case in the Southern District of New York and a prominent person started attacking my witnesses, I'd want to know, so what's going on there? And has that crossed the line from free speech, which we have to keep protected, into something else? And again, I'm not judging it, it would catch my attention.
Well, as a witness, when he tweets these things at you, do you ever feel intimidated?
I don't, but that's not an element of the statute. It's not about how I feel, it's about an endeavor to tamper with a witness, to intimidate a witness, or to obstruct justice. I've had enough of this nonsense that, like I said, my reaction is, oh God.
So if
But that's not an element
So
of
if
the
the legal standard doesn't include how it makes you feel, what other purpose would his tweets attacking you as a witness have other than to intimidate you? I mean, is it clear that that's the intent?
I don't know. I can't see from the outside, just like when people ask me, did he obstruct justice, in asking me to drop, they're telling me to drop the Michael Flynn investigation. I can't answer for sure because I can't see the other evidence that reflects on his state of mind, which I could imagine would be complicated evidence, but it is, it requires a view that I can't see. But if I were a prosecutor, I'd want to understand what that evidence might be.
I mean, let me just be, do you think he's in a lot of trouble right now on the obstruction of justice question? Because it sounds like his tweets may amount to a clear intent to obstruct. They may amount to witness tampering. And we're learning more every day that is opaque to us from the two investigations, the Southern District and the Mueller probe.
I don't know. I can't tell for two reasons. First, I'm a witness, and so I just have one limited vantage point. And second, Bob Mueller and his people have done this like total pros. And so literally everything they've done has surprised us when they've had a court filing. That's the way it's supposed to be. So I know, I think your extraordinary commentator, analyst Chuck Rosenberg once said, he's an Olympic swimmer and we're dog paddlers, right? There's no doubt that that's true. So even if I had a sense, I'd want to have the humility to say, I can't really tell.
On the obstruction of justice investigation, I think my understanding is it centers around his conduct as president. As president, one of the first incidents that have come under scrutiny, as far as we know, was the Mike Flynn episode. Take us back in time, and who was Mike Flynn, and how did you catch him lying to the FBI?
He was, I probably can talk about this more because he's pled guilty now,
right,
and the case is closing. He was the National Security Advisor to the president. He was the designee as the National Security Advisor to the president, probably starting in December, and he came to our attention in the early part of January when there were statements made by the vice president in public about interactions that Flynn, as the National Security Advisor designee, had had with the Russians. And we knew those representations were very different than what the facts were. And given that we already had a case open to understand whether any Americans were working with the Russians as part of their effort to undermine our democracy, trying to figure out what was going on there was very important to us.
What did you think when you found out that the National Security Advisor designee was lying about conversations with the Russian ambassador?
Why is he lying?
Do you know the answer?
I still don't know the answer to that. So again, I have a limited vantage point, but it was clear that he was lying, that he lied to two FBI agents on the 24th of January in the Situation Room in a conference room, and it was clear that he was lying. But the why was really interesting to us, and I didn't get that. I wouldn't tell you that answer if I found it, but I didn't get it before I was fired in May.
You look at this White House now, and it's hard to imagine two FBI agents ending up in the sit room. How did that happen?
I sent them. Something I probably wouldn't have done or maybe gotten away with in a more organized investigation, a more organized administration, in the George W. Bush administration, for example, or the Obama administration. the protocol, two men that all of us have perhaps increased appreciation for over the last 2 years. And in both of those administrations, there was process. And so if the FBI wanted to send agents into the White House itself to interview a senior official, you would work through the White House counsel, and there'd be discussions and approvals and who would be there. And I thought, it's early enough, let's just send a couple guys over. And so we placed a call to Flynn, said, hey, we're sending a couple guys over. Hope you'll talk to them. He said, sure. Nobody else was there. They interviewed him in a conference room at the White House Situation Room, and he lied to them. And that's what he's now pled guilty to.
What did he think they were coming over there for?
I don't think he knew. No, we didn't tell him. Just said, we got sending over a couple of agents. I want to ask you some questions. I didn't have this conversation. My deputy director did. But hope you got a few minutes you can sit down and talk to them. And he said, sure.
Okay, I have a 6-year-old, and so this is a question I hear all the time that I'm going to ask you. What happened next?
That's also what federal prosecutors do in court, so that you're ready. What happened next was that he lied, and then the investigation continued to try and understand the whys behind that. Locking down the lies, but also trying to understand what was behind that. And so it was an active investigation when on Valentine's Day I was in the Oval Office for the first counterterrorism briefing of the new president, where I had a prominent role because I was to tell him what the threat is inside the United States. And I had some pretty hair-raising stuff to tell him, and he seemed distracted. And then, I don't think asked questions, and then at the end, kicked everybody else out saying he wanted to speak to me alone.
And what did he say?
He said he wanted to talk about Mike Flynn. And then in substance, in that conversation, he asked me, which I took as a direction, to let it go. That he's a good guy, I hope you'll let it go. And I didn't let it go. I was really stunned. I knew something important was going to happen, because you got to remember, I'm sitting in a horseshoe on the other side of the Resolute desk from the president. And in that horseshoe is the vice president, the woman who's now the director of the CIA, Gina Haspel, and also in that horseshoe is the Attorney General of the United States, who's my boss, then Jeff Sessions. And the president kicked them all out. Sessions actually tried to linger by my chair, and the president shooed him from the office. Jared Kushner tried to linger by my chair. He shooed him as well. And so I knew whatever we were going to talk about was going to be really important. And so people have asked me, why didn't you say more, that kind of thing. One of the reasons is I was so focused on trying to remember every word, because I knew whatever we were going to talk about was something I would need to remember. And so I was looking at his mouth, literally trying to remember every word. And so he asked me to drop the investigation. I just replied by saying, agreeing that Flynn's a good guy, which had been my experience, very friendly, a nice person in my interactions. And then shortly thereafter, it ended. And I left and went very quickly and wrote a memo writing down everything that I had remembered. And then I emailed my staff, who had prepared me, a lot of work to prepare me to give the first counterterrorism briefing to a new president. And I said, the briefing went fine, but now I have to write another memo. And they knew what I meant, that something had happened. And then I sat with them and said, look, read my memo, and let's talk about what we should do, because obviously it's evidence of obstruction of justice. So how to handle that was something we struggled with. And we decided to keep it tight for two reasons. First, we didn't want to infect the investigative team. We didn't want them to know the president had just said, drop that investigation. We were not going to abide the direction, and we didn't want to affect the investigators. So we said, we'll keep it among this small group of 5 or 6. And the next question was, do we take it across the street and tell the leadership of the Department of Justice? And we decided not yet, because Jeff Sessions is the only Senate-confirmed official over there, and we believed then that he was about to have to recuse himself from anything related to this kind of stuff. And there was no Deputy Attorney General yet, and so we held it and said, once the Department of Justice figures out how they're going to supervise the Russia investigation, because Rod Rosenstein had been saying during his confirmation that he would consider appointing a special counsel. So we thought, let's Rosenstein get on, let them sort that out, then we'll take it across the street. Because it's a big deal, obviously, to begin an obstruction investigation of the sitting president.
It sure is. What happened next?
With respect to that, nothing before I was fired. Rosenstein came
Okay,
on.
so wait, stop. So
Yeah.
you have it in your head and in your memo and in your staff that the President of the United States obstructed justice, and you've told no one, and you're fired.
Potentially obstructed justice. Because, again, the obstruction statute requires a specific corrupt intent. And so we had evidence of obstruction that we needed to investigate further. One of our problems, too, was, so what would the investigation look like? You're alone. It's my word against his, which is why, I'm sure we'll come to it with your what next, but why it was so important when he tweeted at me after I was fired about the tapes.
Lordy, I hope they're tapes.
Yeah, because suddenly it occurred to me in the middle of the night. It took me days for this realization to pop in my head. I almost never wake up during the night. I woke up at 2 a.m. and thought, oh my God, if there are tapes, that solves the problem of the investigation. Because it's not my word against his.
Right.
I wrote a memo, that's all great. But if there's a tape, I know what will be on that tape. And so that's when I said, I got to get that out publicly to force the Department of Justice to go get the tapes, to appoint a special counsel to go get the tapes.
So you made the mistake of believing Donald Trump was telling the truth.
You know, I didn't know, but I thought, there really could be tapes. I mean, I think, I think I...
I mean, you think?
Well,
I mean,
I'd heard
you
that
think
about...
he would tape himself?
But I'd heard that, I forget where I'd heard that, but I had heard that about him.
Yeah, Cohen has a bunch of recordings.
And
but
so I thought, well, I'm not going to name any names, but other presidents had taped. And so I woke up in the middle of the night and thought, holy cow, there are tapes.
I want to hear your,
someone has to
hear
go
your
get 'em.
wife's version of this story about the middle of the night on your next book tour. I want to ask you, so this is maybe the most famous meeting you have with the president, but I feel like in reading your book, the one that maybe put the mold in your brain about his worldview when it came to Russia was probably in January when you went up with the intel chiefs to brief him. Will you tell that story?
Yeah, we came up January the 6th, a Friday, to brief the president-elect and his incoming team. The day before, we had been in the Oval Office with President Obama and his senior team. It was our returning on an assignment he gave us right after the election, which is put together everything we know, the United States intelligence community, about what the Russians did, what their goals were, what their tools were, everything we know, so that I, the President of the United States, can figure out what to do, and so I can equip the next president to protect the country. And so that work was done really almost all in December, finished the first week of January, and we went to brief him. And General Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, briefed President Obama and Vice President Biden and laid it all out. They had 3 goals. Their goals were overarching goal was to damage the American democracy, dirty up the shining city on the hill. Second, hurt Hillary Clinton, who Putin hated. And third, help Donald Trump.
Mission accomplished.
I'd say their efforts succeeded beyond their wildest imagination. Maybe too well, honestly, but we'll see. And so we laid all that out for the president, and then General Clapper said, there's some additional material that is of a difficult nature, and we've decided that we have to brief the incoming president about it. It involves sexual allegations, an allegation that he was involved with prostitutes in Moscow, that images of that were captured by the Russians, so they'd be in a position to coerce the new president. And we think that we have to tell the incoming president. And President Obama looked at General Clapper straight ahead and said to him, what's the plan for that briefing? And Clapper looks at me and goes, well, Jim is going to do it.
So Clapper didn't like you.
Well, and Clapper explained the logic of it. Clapper said, look, FBI owns counterintelligence. Jim is staying, or so we thought. Jim is staying, and Jim's an effective communicator, and this is going to be a very difficult communication. Yeah. And just tell you an aside, I've been struck by how the 2 presidents before President Trump that I worked closely with both had an ability to use humor in a really effective way, and the current one does not. President Obama turned slightly without changing his facial expression to me and raised and lowered both eyebrows like a Groucho Marx thing. And in that moment, I heard in my head, you poor bastard. And what was cool about it was, it kind of relaxed me.
Yeah.
Because I had this lump in my stomach as Clapper's describing this. So the next day, fast forward, we're up here, and we're at Trump Tower. Brennan, Clapper, myself, and Mike Rogers, the head of NSA, and we went up and did a briefing for the full national security team of the president-elect on the Russia, just we had told President Obama, and then I stayed.
Who was that? That was Reince Priebus, Mike Flynn, Pence, and Trump?
Yeah, and more than
Jared.
that, too. No, Jared Kushner wasn't there, but Mike Pompeo was there, Sean Spicer was there, Tom Bossert was there. These were their incoming.
So Homeland Security Advisor, the press secretary, and
Yep, and Pompeo,
CIA.
designee, and so we briefed. Clapper did most of it, briefed it to them, and they had almost no questions like the questions that President Obama had, which is, how do I protect the country from this threat going forward? The questions were all backward looking. You can confirm, though, that it had no impact on the vote. And Clapper said at least twice, no, we don't do that kind of work. The American intelligence community does not do intelligence analysis of American elections. Right. So we don't have anything for you on that. What we can tell you is they're going to come for us again, all that kind of stuff. And then they began at the table wordsmithing what they would say to the media to downplay this, which had never happened to me before with either President Bush or President Obama, that they had a press strategy session with the chiefs of the American intelligence agencies. And then the meeting came to an end, and Clapper said, there's some additional material that Jim needs to brief you about.
How'd that go?
That was a difficult experience. I was nervous on a lot of levels, but mostly because this is just a natural human thing. We all have a tendency to project onto others the way we see the world.
Right.
And so I said, Donald Trump is going to think I'm pulling a J. Edgar Hoover on him.
Yeah.
He's going to think I'm telling him this in order to jam him, so he knows that I know about this thing in Moscow, which was not the purpose at all. And so I was very nervous about it going off the rails.
Yeah.
And beginning a presidential administration with the FBI being at war with the President of the United States. And it went off the rails pretty quickly.
So, I mean, that's interesting the way that you frame it, because he was already at war with the intelligence community. General Hayden was on our network that day, and I asked him, you know, why? Why is he at war with the intelligence community? Did you start to ask yourself the why questions sitting there? And you write with great detail about this meeting, and you know, for those of us who have to cover this every day, it's instructive to go back and read about that meeting, because a normal person, a normal politician, a normal president would hear that Russia is still interested in meddling and kick their press people out of the room and really want to know how to get them. They'd want to go on the offense. Yep. I think Obama and Bush would have wanted that. And Obama actually had the opposite reaction, right? He didn't want the public to know. And people can debate the wisdom of that, but he really just wanted to protect this country from Russia. Here was a president who did the opposite. He didn't want to protect the country from Russia, but he wanted the public to know. So did you start to, I mean, what did you think? And again, you know, obviously there's an intel piece that you were listening to American adversaries, so you knew there were contacts and communication. What did you think when the President of the United States started working on a press release instead of asking one question about an American adversary trying to hurt this country?
It was really troubling, and again, I started going to the whys. Something really weird is going on here, and that weirdness continued where he would not even criticize Putin in private, and trying to understand that, it just kept running through my head. So why is this? Why on earth do they don't care about this? And then I was also struck by the nature of the leadership. As I write in the book, I kept having this weird image in my head of the Cosa Nostra work I'd done here in Manhattan, the mafia work, and with the culture of leadership that a mafia boss creates. And we're sitting around the table at Trump Tower, and that image keeps coming into my head. So I push it away. Comes back, I push it away, because I'm thinking, that's so dramatic. It just kept coming and coming and coming. And so I was struck by that, the way in which the leader, the interactions, the way the leader acted, struck me as similar to that kind of culture, and that there's something going on here, that there's not an interest in protecting the country from this ongoing threat.
The first sentence of your first chapter is the life begins with a lie, right?
Yep.
Did this White House begin with a lie?
Yes. I actually technically began with the first lie, capital F, capital L, which was about the inauguration crowd. And that, it's funny, but it's also horrifying, right? That's the first of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lies. And this is the danger of numbness, that the norm, the touchstone of truth that we grade our people against, our leaders against, is washing away. It's washing away in a tidal wave of lying. But the official first was that his crowd was bigger than Barack Obama's crowd.
And it wasn't even close.
No, that's not my take, your take. That's just a lie.
It's a lie, and I mean, and a picture and this is where they've gone. They've careened into the Orwellian. He says this. This isn't a critique. The president has said from the podium, "Don't believe what you see. Don't believe what you hear." Did you feel like that's where an organization run by a leader that reminded you of a mob family was heading?
Yes. I mean, the characteristic of a Cosa Nostra family is it's all about the boss. It's all about what you can do for me. It's not about any external reference points or lasting values. It's about me. And that was what I kept being struck by, that it's not about anything else except the boss. And when that's the culture, well, those people don't tell the boss the truth, right? Because they're afraid of the boss. It's a fear-based leadership, and that just begins this journey that's entirely about lies. You occasionally tell the truth, but it's only because you figure that'll work, but then you tell lies and lies all day long.
I want to ask you two more questions about this meeting, because you left and wrote a memo after that meeting.
Yep.
Why?
You're talking about the Trump Tower one? For two reasons. First,
you started writing it in your car, right?
Yes, I did. As soon as I got in the car, my special assistant, Josh Campbell, handed me a secure laptop, and I sat as we were going across Fifth Avenue, boop, 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 typing it out. Again, because I had tried to remember every word, so I'm trying to put it down. And one practical reason is I needed to inform Clapper and Brennan and Rogers what had happened when they weren't there. But second, and which became the reason for my doing it ever after, was I had had a conversation with the President of the United States about something that touched on the FBI's responsibilities, him, and that I believed he might lie about. And to protect the FBI and to protect myself, honestly, I needed a record of this, something I had never done before with a president, anyone, that I felt like this person might lie about what just happened here, and it would be derelict of me not to have a record of it. And so I started that practice.
Which part did you think he'd lie about?
I thought he might lie about what had happened in the second session.
When you told him about the dossier?
I told him about the prostitute business.
So I was told by a smart colleague of mine to ignore the sex and follow the money when it came to the dossier. And I wonder if you think in the revelation that one of the lies told to the American people was that there was no business intersection between Trump's orbit and the Russians. We learned that Michael Cohen was actively pursuing a Trump Tower Moscow well beyond, up to the point that Trump knew he'd be the nominee, beyond the GOP convention. And we now know that was a lie, but Vladimir Putin and the Russians had to have known that was a lie all along. Sally Yates testified before Congress that she had to come over and tell the White House that Mike Flynn was a potential target for blackmail because the Russians knew the truth. Why wouldn't Donald Trump be a similar target for blackmail if until 2 weeks ago, the Russians knew more than we did about Donald Trump's interest in doing business in Moscow?
I'm going to be a little careful with you here because I don't want to talk about things I know from the investigation, from the election to when I was fired. It's obviously a concern about any public official if there's significant information that would expose them to embarrassment or to liability that a foreign adversary knows. Those are leverage points. It's the reason we told him about the prostitute business. We didn't know whether it was true or not, and frankly didn't really care, except we wanted to do a defensive briefing. So in case there's something to it, we undermine the adversary's ability to use it as leverage by telling the person who might be blackmailed, look, the FBI knows all about this.
Right.
So don't think you can sneak
It was
around.
all over the press. It wasn't a secret.
Don't think you have to do what the adversary wants you to do to keep this secret, because it ain't a secret within the government. We know it, which is why we're telling you. That's a defensive briefing. And so a big part of the FBI's business in counterintelligence is trying to understand, are there leverage points that an adversary has, and how do we defeat them? And so that's about all I'm going to say about that topic.
But when we learned in a filing from the Mueller probe that there were efforts from the Trump organization to build a tower in Moscow and that Putin's deputies were intimately involved. I didn't know that until that filing, but obviously the Russians did. Wouldn't just the same process point apply that Sally Yates said applied to Flynn?
I'm going to give you kind of the same general answer, which is, yeah, if there is significant information that would expose a lie by a major American public figure that an adversary nation knows, of course it's a real concern.
Okay, I'm going
because
to
they
take that
could
as a
use
yes.
it. And even if they don't use it explicitly, the public figure's operating under the fear. You can coerce someone without actually even doing it in a way. If you know that I know something about you that you're really worried about, even if I don't say, hey, Nicolle, if you're not on my team, I'm going to let this out, it's front of your mind and can affect the way you act, even without me pressing the button.
You write about how when you felt that you really lost Trump was around this question of the nature of the Russian regime. And you name some of the interviews that I cite all the time. The O'Reilly interview where Bill O'Reilly says, Putin's a killer. And he says, we kill people too. My colleagues Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski pursued a similar line of questioning with him. He kills journalists. He's quoted, I think, John McCain. He's a brutal thug, dictator, poisons dissidents I guess that happened after, but, and he defended him. We now have learned in filings from the Mueller probe that he was keeping secret that after he became the nominee of his party, he was still pursuing business in Russia. It all began with a lie. Are the lies catching up with him?
Time will tell. Yeah, I can't see what the end of the Mueller effort looks like. I don't know what form it will take. I don't know what they'll conclude. And so I can't say in that respect. I can tell you that all of us should use every breath we have to make sure that the lying stops on January 20th, 2021. And what happened? And look, I'm an optimist. I really think we're going to be okay. And among my sources for optimism is what happened at the beginning of last month. Yeah. To see the number of people who got off the couch and went out and voted America's values is inspiring.
Would you ever run?
No.
Have you ever thought about it?
I've thought about it enough to know that I'm never going to run for office. Yeah.
Do you feel like this moment requires you to reconsider for a minute? I mean, right?
No. Because I think you don't have to run for office to be useful to your country and your community.
But it helps.
Well, but there's lots of ways to be useful. And look, I don't love my current life as a semi-employed celebrity. But by accident of history, I have a role that I can play to speak about the rule of law and the truth, and I think that's useful. And so that's the role I'm trying to play.
So I used to.
And look, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. But so what?
It's kind of what we need.
But the things I want to talk about are above those divisions. Right? We have important disagreements in this country about health care, about immigration, about abortion, about guns, and those are really important issues. But above those things are a set of values that we have in common, and they are threatened today. And so I think we have to talk about and vote our values, and then we'll get back to the important discussions about the issues that divide us, but focus now, because it's in threat, on the things that make us what we are as this country. That's the reason I called this book A Higher Loyalty, is to try and say there's a thing that's above the things we normally worry about that is what makes us. This country shouldn't exist, right? We don't have common religion, common language tradition. We don't come from a common genetic origin. our commonality is our values. And those are threatened today. We got to restore that and protect that, and then we'll get on with our normal, messy, wonderful democracy.
I've badgered a lot of people into running for office in my career, so excuse me, it's a personal peccadillo here. But don't you think that it's the idea, it's not just the values, it's the idea of this country that's under assault? And if not you, then who like you can defend the idea? I mean, you said I'm not a Democrat or Republican. Isn't that the answer? Neither is Donald Trump, for the record.
Yeah, here's my worry. It wouldn't be me, but I would be very worried if a significant independent candidate emerged, because I believe that's Donald Trump's reelection strategy.
Probably.
Is to have a Kasich, a Bloomberg, somebody run in the middle so he can get reelected with a plurality of 37%. Or for the Democrats to pick someone who appeals to such a small piece of that bell curve that the giant middle stays home.
Right.
And then he gets reelected with 50% of a very small vote. Look, I understand the Democrats have important debates to have about who their candidate should be. They have to win.
Yeah.
They have to win.
Amen. I said to you that I watched all of your interviews on the book tour, and I couldn't believe no one talked about all the great stuff in the beginning. And here we are, and I didn't talk about all the great stuff in the beginning. Because there's so much
I used to say to people, that book's not about Donald Trump.
It's not about, the book is not, I mean, I hope you all bought it. It's not about Donald Trump. But all of the and I've read a lot of political memoirs and political biographies and biographies of people who spent their life in government service. And I don't know that I've ever seen anyone reveal themselves so much. And it's amazing. And I wondered if I could ask you to read this one section about...
Proof that I'm not going to be a candidate.
Well, no, proof that you'd be a good one, but I'll let that go. Chuck Rosenberg knows I don't do a good job of letting things go. But you know, and I'm a mother of a 6-year-old boy, and so you write so openly about being bullied. And I was in the Bush administration, and I watched you. You were a fearless advocate for your principles, even when they sort of contradicted the policy of the administration in which we both served. You then went on and succeeded Robert Mueller as FBI Director and served for Democratic president, and then you're in the eye of the storm, literally. And it sounds like with your family, that is a calm eye of the storm, as eyes often are, but to those on the outside, it feels like a swirl. But it made sense to me when I read this first third of the book, which is really about your childhood and your life. And I told you that I was going to try to not make you cry, and I don't know if I'm going to succeed, but if you just read that part right there, it starts with during high school.
Oh, here. Okay. During high school, I would come home from school and sit with my mom. You're going to do it.
Sorry. You want me to read it?
No, I'll do it. I would come home from school and sit with my mom to talk about my day. When she was dying from cancer in 2012, we spoke of those hours. Starting when I was a little boy, she told me much was expected of me. Before she died, my mother showed me a note I had written to her after getting sent to my room at the age of 7 or 8. I am sorry, the note read. I will be a great man someday. She had saved it in her dresser for almost 50 years.
And you are. Thank you. I'm done. These are questions from all of you. Okay, if you were President Obama, what would you have done differently in the fall of 2016?
That's a really hard one. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk about it. We actually did not spend a lot of time debating whether we should say something publicly about the just begun counterintelligence investigations, because we didn't know whether we had anything. I don't remember a single discussion about that. There were lots of discussions about whether we should tell the American people that the Russians are coming. And President Obama was in a tight spot there. Because remember what I said the goals were? The first goal of the Russians was to damage our democracy, faith in our electoral process. And so if Barack Obama announces that the Russians are coming for the election, has he just helped them accomplish their goal, one? And two, he thought, as the rest of the world did, I think, including Donald Trump, that Donald Trump didn't have a chance to be elected president. And so if he makes an announcement, has he just given Donald Trump an excuse to help the Russians accomplish their first goal by condemning the corruption of the electoral process? And so he was really wrestled with this. And ultimately decided to say something, but it was quite late. The good news is, you know this, that Washington leaks like a sieve. And so the American people knew. By the time of October, the American people knew what was going on. In fact, they saw Donald Trump calling on Russia to give emails.
Hey,
and
Russia,
like
if
that.
you're listening, have
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton's emails.
But that was a really hard question for him. And so I don't know, even in hindsight, whether I would have made a different call than he. Now, what he tried to do is he sent Dennis McDonough to the Hill and tried to get Republicans and Democrats to jointly, we briefed the Gang of Eight, the leaders of the House and Senate, I did personally, on here's what we see, here's what the Russians are doing. NSA was there, CIA was there. And in my view, to their everlasting shame, the Republican leaders, McConnell and the Speaker, Ryan, refused. And to my mind, we were asking them not to do something that was about Democrats or Republicans, that was about America. You all defeat the Russian goal, right, by telling them in a bipartisan way, there's something going on here, folks, you need to be aware of it, and they refused. And I think they're going to have a hard time explaining that to history.
What did you guys think, though, when you heard Donald Trump say, hey, Russia, if you're listening, why don't you release Hillary Clinton's emails? And then, lo and behold, they appear. Or is that why there was a counterintelligence investigation open?
No, the counterintelligence investigation began before he made that statement. It began at the end of July when we got information from an allied nation that a foreign policy advisor to the campaign, a guy named George Papadopoulos, had months earlier. This is something people miss. The Papadopoulos conversation happened in the spring before there was any Russian dumping of emails about the Russians' possession of emails. We didn't find that out from our allied partners until after the allies saw all this stuff being dumped and said, holy crap, we better tell the Americans about this conversation we had 3 months ago. And it was when we got that information that we said, wait a minute, there may be Americans who are helping the Russians in this effort. And that's when we opened the counterintelligence files on 4 people, not Donald Trump. And so all that summer we were trying to do 2 things. One, figure out what the broad Russian effort was and whether there were ways that President Obama could deter it or stop it. And then begin to sniff around to try and find out, are any Americans part of this effort?
And the 4 names are public, right? I mean, you just said one, Papadopoulos. Donald Trump and his allies have declassified the FISA warrant for Carter Page. That's public. And then I think the Roger Stone stories suggest that he was on the radar. And are they not public? The 4
They're
names?
not public.
You
can figure them
good
out.
Guesser?
You can figure them out from the competing filings
Right.
of the House Intelligence Committee. But I actually checked this for my awesome testimony on Friday.
Yeah.
They have not declassified the names of the 4
names.
people.
I think that's a decent guess. What do you believe is the best, most effective method of removing this president prior to 2020, impeachment or indictment?
Well, my understanding is the Department of Justice has long had the position that the president can't be indicted. So long as that holds, the only legal mechanism would be the one set forth in our Constitution. And I'm going to say something that I said when the book came out and people thought was weird. I'm going to say it again. You may still think it's weird. In a way, I hope Donald Trump is not removed from office by impeachment because it would let the country off the hook. And it would drive into the fabric of our nation 1/3 of the people believing there was a coup. And we need a moment of inflection where we all get off the couch and say, that is not who we are, and in a landslide, rid ourselves of this attack on our values. And if we, in a way, short-circuited that with an important, legitimate process through the Constitution, I worry that we'd be letting ourselves off the hook in a way, and we wouldn't have the moment of clarity that we need in this country. That said, if the facts are there and the legislative two houses of Congress think it's appropriate, that's fine.
So you're saying that you think it's more decisive to have him voted out?
Yes. And a reaffirmation, right? In this country, we go through cycles. Where anytime we have a significant period of progress, we have retrenchment. That's the story of America. It's a jagged line. It always slopes up because our advance always exceeds the retrenchment. We need one of those periods, a moment of inflection where we turn back up again and say, okay, we've had a period of retrenchment. I get it. We elected a black guy president. A woman won the popular vote. We've legalized gay marriage. We have changed our approaches to work and family. There's tremendous change in this country. And for reasons that historians would tell you were fully predictable, we've seen a reaction. Okay, we need to now jump up in a significant way. And a removal by impeachment, in my mind, would muddy that. We need a clear jump upward, and it will come from tens of millions of Americans who don't vote, voting their values.
I didn't get to this in a fulsome way, so I'll let one of our audience members get the question to you. Do you feel guilty about the way you handled the Clinton investigation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't. I feel terrible that I was involved at all. That it causes me almost physical pain to think and talk about it. We kept finding ourselves in places where there was never a good option. There were two options. One sucked worse. And so every time we tried to choose the least bad option, it was a nightmare from which we can't awaken. And I say to people, look, reasonable people would do differently than what I did in October, but I hope folks stare at the decision we had to make. My team was telling me that what you and Loretta Lynch and Sally Yates told Congress and the American people repeatedly in the summer of 16, which was, we're done here. There's no there. Go away. Move on with your election. And I got hammered by the Republicans, and I stood my ground and said, no, there's no case there. There's no case there. You can rely on that because I represent the FBI. October 27th in the morning, my team tells me, not only is that not true what you said, but the result may change. We have found hundreds of thousands of Hillary Clinton's emails, including emails we never found before, maybe from her first 3 months as Secretary of State, where if there was going to be evidence that she knew she was doing something she shouldn't do, it would be there when she was still using her BlackBerry. Sir, we see tens of thousands of BlackBerry emails on there. We can't possibly finish this before the election, and the result may change. So what do I do? There's no option to go home and take a nap and get out of this. So I can do two things. I can tell Congress that what I had said repeatedly and what Sally and Loretta had said is no longer true. This thing I know the American people are relying upon, or I cannot speak. Our norm has always been, and I still believe in it, if you can avoid it, you take no action in the run-up to an election. Might have an impact on the election. I said to my team, oh my God, speaking could really have an impact on this election. But concealing that I know the country is relying upon something I know now not to be true, I believe will destroy the FBI and the Department of Justice, maybe forever. Forget about Hillary Clinton's presidency, which I think it would have had profound effects on. I can't consider that. What will it do to these institutions? So I could speak or I could conceal. Really bad or catastrophic. And so I chose really bad and knew at that moment, no one's ever going to get this. Because as soon as we make the decision, everyone else will be looking down a path at us and say, oh my God, look at the impact you have. And I'd have to say, I don't know what the impact will be. What's the right thing to do here? And so I respect disagreement. The Inspector General ripped me for this, and I pushed them to inspect me because I believe in accountability, and God forbid this ever happens again. I'd like a future FBI director to have their guidance, but I told them, look, I love you all. I disagree. I think if I had chosen to conceal this, you'd be writing a report that would savage me for what I had just done to the American democracy. And so I get why people see it differently. I wish I could have gotten away from it entirely, but I couldn't. And so I tried to make the best decision for the right reasons. And the most important question that was asked of me during that whole thing was by one of my best people. Tricia Anderson said, sir, should you consider that what you're about to do may help elect Donald Trump president of the United States? And I said, great question. Thank you. No, not for a moment, because down that path lies the death of the FBI as an independent force in America. Because if I start considering how this will affect the vote, I'm just another player in the tribal warfare. I can't. I have to ask, given the values of this institution, our norms, we have norms that we want to avoid impacting elections. We have norms that we always tell the truth to tribunals, including Congress. What's the right thing to do? And doing that, knowing that we're totally screwed because no one's ever going to fully get it, and march on. And so it was a nightmare, but that's the choices that we face there.
Do you understand that a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters, looking back now, and you just talked about 4 people in the Trump orbit on whom you had files open in a counterintelligence investigation, that was kept secret. Was there any debate along these lines about keeping that secret?
No. Like I said earlier, I don't remember a single discussion about saying something. Because think about it. What would
Not even on the 28th when you were going to go tell, was it Chaffetz that had written the letter? I mean, you had to go tell them that you were reopening Hillary's investigation.
We told the chairs and the rankings of the committees. I know this is a small thing, but I didn't tell anybody publicly. I sent them each privately a letter, but it's Washington, so what are you going to do?
We had it in front of us on the
Yeah, we had it within seconds, which I fully expected, so that's okay. But no is the answer, because first of all, we've just opened classified investigations of 4 people. We don't know whether we have anything to this. So we don't want to alert them we're coming.
Yeah.
It would be brutally unfair to these people to say that because we don't know whether we have anything. So I've said to folks who've asked that, what would I have said in October? About whom that wouldn't have been damaging to an investigation and really, really unfair? And so I don't remember that discussion. Now people have said, well, did you treat it differently than the Hillary case? No, actually the rule runs through all of them. Remember, the Hillary Clinton investigation began with a public referral to us, even though we still refused to talk about it for 3 months until it got ridiculous. Then we said, yes, we have this, but we're not going to say another word. And we did not say another word until I announced, we're done here, move on. It wasn't that announcement that trapped us. What trapped us was saying to Congress that summer, it's over. It's over, it's over, it's over, rely on us, it's over, it's over. Then what do you do when it's not over and it might end up in a different place? And so the rule was the same. People have said, well, why? You were reopening investigation, you don't talk about investigations. And my reaction is, you're absolutely right, except this is an investigation we had told everyone was done. And that's a different kettle of fish.
Did you testify on Friday that you opened a leak investigation into leaks from the New York field office around that second announcement?
Yes.
What was that about?
There was media reporting that seemed to indicate that, most prominently, Rudy Giuliani had information in October about what the FBI was doing and that there might be something coming with respect to the Clinton.
Donald Trump has a surprise or two.
Yeah, I didn't remember the words, but I was very concerned about that. And look, a lot of people have said to me, your decision was actually not all that consequential, because once the Department of Justice decided to go get a search warrant to get Anthony Weiner's the laptop, it was going to leak anyway. And so you agonize and beat yourself up for this decision, it was going to leak anyway? Maybe. But I was very concerned about the leaks, and so I asked for an internal investigation to find out what is going on, and that was still ongoing when I got fired.
Do you know how it ended?
I don't.
Is it still ongoing now?
Don't know.
You'll tell us about it?
I wouldn't tell you anyway, but I suspect, knowing the FBI, knowing the Bureau, I'm highly confident that it's either ongoing or it reached a conclusion, because that's not something our internal affairs people ever let go of.
This is a good one. What is the one leadership skill, in your opinion, President Trump would benefit the most from that he's missing now?
The ability to listen. I was struck that Barack Obama is the best listener as a leader I had ever seen. And Donald Trump is the worst I've ever seen. And the most important attribute of a leader is an ability to get people to tell you the truth about everything, including about yourself. And presidents, and George Bush saw this too, you have to create an environment where you flatten the hill. Otherwise, you're at the top of this steep hill. Which is why George Bush and Barack Obama never had a meeting in the Oval Office that I was at where they sat behind the desk. They always sat in the sitting area where we could kind of pretend we're just hanging out here talking about stuff. Donald Trump is always behind the desk and always talking. And so he's at the top of a really steep hill. He puts a block of wood on that hill slope and speaks down the hill at you the whole time. How on earth is he ever going to hear the truth about himself or anything that matters? And so, now look, to be able to listen well, you have to have confidence in yourself. Because that quiet, when Barack Obama would listen for 10 minutes, that man would listen without interrupting, that takes confidence. Because that silence is threatening to an insecure person, because it's an admission that you may know something I don't know. Obama had the confidence to be quiet and try and get that. Donald Trump is a deeply, deeply insecure person, and so I don't see any prospect that he would be able to be quiet for long enough to hear the truth.
Do you think insecurity is all that explains it, or do you think it's really possible that all of these leads being investigated and pursued, and many that we probably don't know about, do you think it's possible that he's compromised or involved in something that the Russians were trying to do in 2016?
Well, I see insecurity as a root cause, right? He has a deep flaw that he has no external reference points. Right? Every leader has external reference points, the higher things: history, tradition, logic, the Constitution, faith, philosophy. Donald Trump has one reference point, and it's internal. It's how do I fill this hole in me, this need for affirmation, for you to tell me, and I've experienced this personally, for you to tell me how awesome I am constantly. That's a root cause. Now, whether that root cause has led to situations where he's compromised, I don't know. And those are words I never thought would come out of my mouth about a president. And I was asked at one point, is it possible the Russians have tapes of him engaged in unusual activities in Moscow? And the answer is, I don't know, but to be truthful, it's possible. It's possible. And I can't imagine ever saying that, but that's the truth.
I can't imagine it either. I can't imagine these are the times in which you live. All right, I think this is the last one. How about this? If you had to do it all over again, would you issue the late October letter? I think you answered that already, so we won't let that. That's answered.
Yeah, I would, because I can't see another option. Again, I've thought about this 1,000 times, and I can't see how on that day I choose concealment over speaking. I just can't.
It's such a remarkable contrast, though. Do you think anyone in the White House has deliberations like that?
Not that I've witnessed or heard about.
So you do great.
And that was the other key, though. I'm accountable for these decisions, and I should get the blame or credit. Not a whole lot in that second category, but a group of 12 made these decisions, men and women who just argued and debated and pushed each other. That's what a leader has to have around them, and I don't see that in this White House either.
So this is a reminder, copies of A Higher Loyalty are on sale in the lobby, and this is the last question. It's a great one. Thank you, whoever sent this. What's the one thing you know?
What's the one thing I know? The one thing I know is that the normal things that distract us as human beings don't matter. Money, fame, attention, houses, cars. And that the only thing that matters is whether you lived a life of integrity and love and caring for other people. That's the one thing I know for sure.